let's bring in Al Jazeera's Hashem Ahelbarra, who's in Copenhagen for us, covering that defense ministers' meeting. So a crucial meeting in Copenhagen. Hashem, tell us about what they've discussed and what they're trying to achieve on Ukraine.
It was Ukraine fully that dominated the agenda today here in Copenhagen, where EU ministers of defense were working out the details of their security arrangements in Ukraine. And basically by that, they mean the potential for deploying European troops on the ground to monitor the implementation of a ceasefire agreement if there's going to be a deal between Russia and Ukraine. And also the military equipment to be put into place, particularly air defense systems, drones, to protect the skies over Ukraine and to ensure that the Russians are not going to backtrack on their commitments if there's going to be any commitments finalized in the near future. But I have to say that the mood was not really optimistic about the potential for any agreement anytime soon. A while ago, the chief diplomat of the EU, Kaja Kallas, said that the latest barrage of missile and drone attacks by the Russians targeting Kyiv are a strong indication that Vladimir Putin is stalling and not interested whatsoever in any deal in Ukraine, and that for the time being the EU will have to ramp up its military, military support for Ukraine and ensure that Ukraine has all it takes to defend itself and protect its territory. So from a European perspective, this is going to be a long way to go. Also, they are hoping to be able, once they finalize their security arrangements for Ukraine, to convince the Americans to maintain a significant presence, or at least show a strong commitment to helping the Ukrainians for the future.
Also on the agenda is the Iranian nuclear program, Hashem, with France, the UK and Germany triggering the so-called snapback mechanism, which could lead to the reimposition of international sanctions on Iran. Do you get a sense the Europeans still want to resolve this diplomatically?
They said today that they are hoping to see the Iranians respond positively to the demands that were put forth by the E3, particularly when it comes to reassurances and guarantees when it comes to the nuclear program. They made it quite clear that they have the legitimate right to reimpose the sanctions that prevailed before the 2015 agreement. They remain adamant that Iran has breached all the commitments it made in 2015 and that Iran is not honest about its program. So they say that this 30 days could be a last chance for Iran to come up with a new plan, but at the same time to reconsider how it would like to have a new nuclear deal with the United States of America. But the E3, backed by most European countries, say that the potential for comprehensive package of sanctions targeting Iran is stronger than ever. For them, there are only two possibilities. One, a deal and Iran abandons its nuclear program. Otherwise, more diplomatic and economic isolation.
Hashem, thank you very much for that. That's Al Jazeera's Hashem Ahelbarra, reporting there live from Copenhagen. Well, let's discuss the issue of Iran's nuclear program further now with Sara Dill, who's an international human rights lawyer and Certified Global Sanctions Specialist. Sara is joining us from London. Thank you so much for your time. So, as we heard there from our correspondent, European leaders say they want the snapback mechanism to be a tool to restart diplomacy with Iran. But to give it 30 days rather than an extension, does that suggest to you that they really want to resolve this diplomatically?
I think it demonstrates a poor decision-making on behalf of the E3. Instead of postponing, instead of adding additional time by implementing the snapback, which, recognizing that it was up against a permanent deadline in October, we have Russia taking the presidency of the UN Security Council at that time as well. We also have the UNGA meetings that are about to start in New York. But the problem that this created is that whilst the E3 wanted to send a message about enforcing non-proliferation and that, as they felt, Iran's actions were not in compliance, they've opened the door to a number of problems long term, given the unique ways in which Security Council vetoes operate as to this particular sanctions regime. And whether or not they are hoping to restore international legal pressure or strengthen their negotiating position, they're given that the U.S. is no longer in the agreement,
right.
And the question is what the U.S. position is on this. I think we're in for a very bumpy road ahead.
Right. And on that, I mean, the JCPOA was effectively abandoned by the Trump administration in 2018. You say that this is a poor decision from the E3, but there's also the question of whether Europe still has the standing to invoke snapback sanctions under a deal that has already collapsed in practice.
Correct. And that's precisely the position that Iran has taken. Murmurs from Russia and China have also echoed that. And in fact, when the U.S. tried to invoke the snapback, the sense was they're no longer part of the agreement. Iran has put forward, especially there was a long interview yesterday with the former foreign minister who set forth a lot of his thoughts on this, that the West forfeited their standing to invoke the snapback. And so it will be interesting to see how Iran, either diplomatically, legally before the ICJ, will seek to contest what happens, and in fact, how the Security Council operates in the next 30 days as to the snapback.
Right. And what, if this is enacted, what will more sanctions mean for Iran? Because it seems like they've already suffered a lot of sanctions. What is that going to change?
In practice, potentially nothing. And one of the risks that we have, first and foremost, is that even if Europe wants to provide extensions, wants to give more time for negotiations, the U.S. can veto that. And so if the E3 has not secured the agreement, that the U.S. will go along with any decisions to prolong things whilst negotiations are happening. And in terms of the sanctions being reimposed, I mean, you have arms embargoes, asset freezes, trade restrictions, the ability to inspect ships, as well as visa bans on various Iranian officials and personnel. However, many of these were already in effect under unilateral U.S. sanctions since 2018. The reimposition of new United Nations sanctions will likely have little effect, as Russia and China and potentially other countries will not abide by the sanctions. The European Union has largely been compliant with unilateral U.S. sanctions, despite an EU blocking statute, a specific financial system. The EU companies essentially felt that by not complying with U.S. sanctions, they were placing themselves at great risk for enforcement. On the flip side of this, you do have the issue that enforcement of the sanctions at the UN level is going to be very difficult, because in that juncture, Russia and China do hold vetoes on new designations or on any enforcement actions. So the UN is essentially toothless at this point in terms of enforcement. Any enforcement of sanctions violations or evasion would fall on member states to enforce it on the companies operating in their jurisdictions. Again, something we might see in the US, the UK, or the EU, but not for China, Russia, and other countries.
Sara, thank you so much for your expertise. Thank you for your insight. Sara Dill is a Certified Global Sanctions Specialist joining us from London. Thank you for your time.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.